SCCM has quite the laundry list of prerequisites, and that's mostly because, as we've seen, it relies on so many other Windows technologies which also have their own prerequisites. So in this hands-on lab nugget, we're going to look at the process and a couple of nifty tools that can help us prepare our site for SCCM installation. When your lab environment finishes loading up, you'll be planted right on SCCM Nug. This is the machine where we'll be spending most of our time getting the prerequisites installed and ready to go. There is one thing we'll need to do in Active Directory as well, so we'll head over to our domain controller when the time comes. So we're going to start here by getting right into setup, and I actually have the binaries stored over on our file server. So if you open up File Explorer here and head over to File Nug and the software share within, here it is right here. We're going to be working with current branch 1802, which is the latest version of SCCM. So let's head into that directory and let's attempt to walk through the installation wizard. Now, obviously, this isn't going to end well for us because this machine isn't anywhere near prepared. But if we try to hit the install button here, we'll get an error telling us that we need the .NET Framework 3.5. So if we go and fix that and then come back and do it again, we'll get a different error. And then we'll continue to chase our tail all day long, which is why we have a great tool here in the installation media known as the PreReq Checker. You can find this tool underneath the SMS setup directory, bin, x64, and within here you can just start typing in PreReq, and look at that, there it is. Now I'm going to fire up an elevated command prompt and drag our PreReq Checker right onto it to get the path in there. Now if you run this without any parameters, then obviously it's going to give us help here, and you can target remote machines, you can target specific components, like if you want to just see what the requirements are for a management point, or a distribution point, or a central administration site, or a primary site. You've got some flexibility here, as well as a secondary site in there. But what we're going to do is just run this against the local machine. So I'm going to recall my last command and pass in the local switch. This is going to pop open a GUI and run through all the prerequisites for a default installation, which is a primary site, a distribution point, and a management point. While we're waiting for the PreReq check to finish up, I want to direct your attention to this incredibly handy document that outlines the prerequisites for all of SCCM's roles. So if we scroll down here, we'll get some general requirements. Nothing too earth-shattering in there. 64-bit OS only. Server core is mostly unsupported, which is why we're running the GUI version of server in our lab environment, and some other things in here as well. What I really wanted to show you, though, is if you scroll down, it will list the prerequisites for all of the site and site system roles in SCCM. So again, as I mentioned there, the PreReq check is going to check for a default installation, which will include your primary site, a distribution point, and a management point. So that's all the things it's checking right now. Let's look at the requirements here for our primary site server. Notice we're going to need the .NET Framework 3.5. Hey, that's the error that we saw on the splash screen there. We're going to need the .NET Framework 4.5 or above, remote differential compression, and components from the Windows ADK. So keep this document handy, as it'll help you identify the prerequisites for whichever components you plan to install in your SCCM environment. It looks like our PreReq checker has completed, and we've got a nice list of things that we need to take care of here. The red ones are required, the yellow ones are recommendations. So we're going to need remote differential compression. We're going to need to change the service account that the SQL Server database engine is running under. It's currently running under the NT service account. We're going to change that so it's running under a domain account with minimal privileges. We're going to need the .NET Framework 3.5, as we already know. We're going to need the Windows deployment tools, user state migration tools, and the pre-installation environment. All of those are contained within the Windows 10 ADK. And then we have a bunch of warnings here. We're going to want to extend the Active Directory schema so we can take advantage of all the features in SCCM. I'll show you how to do that here shortly. Verify site permissions. This goes along with extending the schema. We'll take care of that. We're going to need to configure SQL Server's memory usage. Currently, it's configured for unlimited memory, so we'll put a maximum on it. And we're also going to put a minimum on it. So that's what these two are here, min and max memory for SQL Server. And then we'll need to install bits. So let's start by taking care of all those red ones. We'll leave the PreReq checker running. We can always come back once we're done and hit run check again to make sure they're all gone. So I'm going to start here in Server Manager. We'll bring it up here to install all of those Windows roles that we need installed. We'll drop down Manage, choose Add Roles and Features. We'll hit Next here. Next. Next. We don't need any roles. We're good on the roles. Notice here that I have IIS and WSUS ready to go, so we'll hit Next here. We are going to need the .NET Framework 3.5. We are going to need bits, and we'll hit Add Features here. And we're also going to need remote differential compression. That'll take care of 3 of them. We'll hit Next here, and we need to provide a path to the source files for the .NET Framework 3.5. So I'm going to specify an alternate source path here, and I actually have the Server 2016 installation media also here in the software directory, so we can head right into here, sources, and SXX. SXS. Whew, say that one 10 times fast. Let's go ahead and copy the location to this side-by-side directory and paste it here in the path. That's it. That's all we need to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and install this, and we'll let this install in the background. There it is. The close button lit up, so we'll let that go. And now, while that's going on, we also need to install the Windows 10 80K. So I'm going to head back here into File Explorer. We'll head back to Software, and here is the 80K setup. We can accept the defaults on the first few screens here. Yes, we want to install it onto this computer. Sure, we'll send Microsoft our usage data. Sure, we'll accept the license agreement. Here is the screen that matters. We want to install the deployment tools, so we'll uncheck that, the Windows pre-installation environment, and user state migration tools. Those are the 3 requirements that kicked back from the PreReq Checker. So this looks good. We'll go ahead and install. And just keep in mind that will take a while to install. It has 6.4 gigs of data to download. So we'll also let that run in the background while we configure both SQL Server and extend the Active Directory schema. Let's start in SQL Server here. I have SQL Server Management Tools installed locally, so we can connect to our local instance and modify those memory settings. From here, we want to connect to our default instance of SQL Server on this machine, and then in Object Explorer, give that instance a right-click, head down to Properties, and from here we can head down to Memory. These are the 2 settings that the PreReq Checker is referring to. In fact, I can bring that back up here, and if we take a look at our first one, it says SQL Server is configured for unlimited memory usage. Notice that it is right here. That's unlimited. That's a lot of memory, and we don't want SQL Server to run away with all the memory on the system. So we're going to set a maximum there. And then the second one is ensuring that SQL Server has enough memory. So we want to reserve a minimum of 8 gigs for a central administration or primary site and a minimum of 4 gigs for a secondary site. We're setting up a primary site here, so we're going to make sure that we give 8 gigs, at least 8 gigs to SQL Server. So for our minimum here, 8192, and for our maximum, how about 24 gigs? We've got 32 gigs of memory in the system, so that should be more than enough. There we go. So 8 gigs minimum, 24 gigs maximum, and now that looks good for SQL Server. It is all configured. Well, almost all configured. There's one more thing we need to do. We need to modify the SQL Server service account so it runs under a domain account. So let's head down here to the Start button, give it a right click, head up to Run, type in services.msc, and from here you can just start typing in SQL, and it'll take us right to that database engine service. We can open this up, we'll stop it, we'll head over to log on, and I already created a domain account for us to work with here, so we can browse Active Directory, we'll browse the nuggetlab.com domain, and we can just type in SQL, and then hit check names. This should resolve to SQL-SCCM. Perfect. Now we can hit OK, you can enter the password, which is our standard lab password of password, which you can see in the lab tools on the right. And then once we get that in, we can hit apply, and it'll grant it to log on as a service, right? That's great. And then we can hit start to bring this service back online, and that should be it. We're almost there. A couple of things we need to do, both of them in Active Directory. The first thing we're going to do here is extend the Active Directory schema, and we have another tool to help us out there. So if we head back into the setup files here for Configuration Manager, head into SMS Setup, bin, x64, you can start typing in ext, extend Active Directory schema. There it is. So once again, I'm going to open up an elevated command prompt, and all we need to do is just simply run this as is. So I'll drag that in here, we'll hit enter, and it'll just take a second to extend that schema in Active Directory. There it is, successfully extended. Now there are just a few more manual steps that we need to accomplish to complete this extension. We're going to need to create a container for Configuration Manager to store all of these objects, and then set access rights on that container to this machine that will be hosting our primary site. And we're going to need to head over to DCNUG to do this, as that's where we have all of the Active Directory tools installed and ready to go. I've got Server Manager opened up. From here, we're going to drop down tools, and we're going to need to do this using ADSI Edit. Now, you want to be very careful in this tool because we're essentially modifying Active Directory's database directly. So you can really mess up an Active Directory infrastructure if you do something wrong in here. But what we're going to do is right-click on ADSI Edit, hit Connect to. We're going to connect to the default naming context. We'll expand that naming context, expand Nugget Lab, and from here you want to head down to System, and we're going to create a brand new container object in here. So we'll right click, we'll head down to New Object. From here we're going to choose Container, hit Next, and the name here must match exactly. It must say System Space Management. All right, we'll hit Next here, we'll hit Finish here. And so our final step then is to grant our SCCM NUG computer account full control to this container, as that's what's hosting our primary site, and we'll be placing all of the objects inside of here. So we can right click on this, head into Properties, head over here to Security, hit Add, and our object type here, we want to include computers, and the machine account we're looking for here is SCCM-NUG. We can resolve that, hit OK, and we want to make sure that we give this full control, and also we want to give it full control over this object and all descendant objects. So we need to hit the Advanced button here, find our account once again, hit Edit, and make sure this applies to not just this object only, but this object and all descendant objects. And that's about it. That should complete all of our prerequisites. Let's head back over to SCCM NUG and just verify that the ADK finished installing. It did, all right. And everything in Server Manager also finished. So now we should just be able to rerun this check, and hopefully everything is gone. Check it out. That looks much better. Although we still get this process memory allocation warning, we can safely ignore it because we did give SQL Server a minimum of 8 gigabytes. Everything else looks fantastic. We can close out of the PreReq Checker, close out of everything else, and now we're ready to install SCCM, which we'll walk through together in another hands-on lab nugget coming up next. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.